the current Labor MP for Parramatta, Andrew Charlton. Great to have you on the program tonight.
Thanks,
Look, I want to start with the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank in the United States, and then this was closely followed by Signature Bank. There's been a lot of analysis about what went wrong here. Obviously, there were structural issues within Silicon Valley Bank because they had a lot of money in long-term deposits, US Treasury bonds. They underestimated the rate at which founders would need their capital. But also high interest rates are being blamed. What do you think has happened?
Well, the first thing to say is that this is a big event. This has wiped off around $80 billion in value from the ASX over the last week. SVB is the second biggest bank failure in US history, and Signature Bank is the third. So this is a significant event. I think one of the reasons why people are so concerned about it, though, is not so much the failure of those two banks individually.
Yes.
It's the fear that they might be the first in a series of dominoes of banks and other financial institutions which made mistakes during the period of ultra-low interest rates, and now those mistakes are coming back to get them. So that's the real concern.
And are
in
you
financial
concerned
markets.
about that we could be facing a looming banking crisis?
Look, I'm certainly concerned that this period of very low interest rates, followed by a rapid and unexpected increase in interest rates, means that any financial institution which was not very prudent and very careful during that time is likely to be under pressure. And that was the lesson from the global financial crisis.
And does that concern extend to Australia as well as the United States?
I think it does extend to Australia. I think the good thing about the situation in Australia is that we learned the lesson from the financial crisis. So our banks are well capitalised. Our prudential authorities do a good job in regulating the banking sector. And we introduced new policies during the global financial crisis, including depositors' insurance, that mean that we are better prepared for the next crisis when it comes.
Not everyone has depositors' insurance, though, and SVB was one of those that I understand didn't have it. I mean, in Australia, banks are highly regulated, but what about other managed funds that don't have that close oversight?
This is an area that is always of concern and where we need to be extremely vigilant. Managed investment funds, other financial vehicles, in a period where financial conditions are changing rapidly, people need to be very careful because as the situation changes quickly, some financial institutions can find themselves
What can people
in
do? I
difficult
mean, they shouldn't be
situations.
withdrawing their money. That's bringing on another bank run, though.
Absolutely, and they should be confident that Australia's system is well regulated and banks are well capitalised. So there's no issue for Australian ADIs, or what we call banks in Australia, which are very carefully regulated. The issue for people is to make sure that as they think about their financial placement of different assets, they're careful in the way that they do that, and they're acknowledging that interest rates may continue to increase and they're prepared for that.
Look, when you look at this situation, right, and you have, as you've described, rates going from record lows and just rising so aggressively that it's created this situation, or partly created this situation. And now we're hearing that the RBA in Australia, as a result, isn't going to raise rates next month, but it might actually look at cutting them. I mean, it makes you think these people running these central banks just have no bloody idea what they're doing.
Well, ideally, the response to this type of situation of financial instability wouldn't actually be something that should affect interest rates. You really want interest rates to be focused on macroeconomic conditions.
So they shouldn't be cutting them next month.
In an ideal world, you don't want your monetary policy to be focused on the problem of financial stabilisation. You want monetary policy to be focused on the problem of macroeconomics, of inflation and unemployment.
You still want it dealing with bringing down our inflation. If you were running the RBA, you wouldn't be saying, OK, we're going to cut rates now.
You don't
go a different direction.
You definitely don't want to be diverting your monetary policy from the main issue we have in the economy, which is fighting inflation, to be dealing with spot fires in the financial sector. You want good regulation, good prudential oversight to be focused on that problem, and you want monetary policy to be focused on the main game, which is ensuring that we bring down inflation and deliver a soft landing.
All right. Look, I want to ask you about another couple of areas today. We've only got 2 minutes left. Paul Keating, someone you know very well, gave quite a stunning address at the Press Club today. What did you make of his remarks, and in particular, his criticism of Prime Minister Anthony Albanese for incompetence?
Well, I'm always respectful of Paul Keating, but I think in this case he has mischaracterised what Labor is doing and mischaracterised why we're doing it. What we're doing is making a significant investment in Australia's future security as part of a strategy that involves building relationships broadly across the world. And you've seen the Foreign Minister do, I think, a fantastic job building relationships in the Pacific, repairing our relationship with China, and Prime Minister Anthony Albanese in India this week building strong relationships there. So it's part of a...
He's still clearly very influential, though. He meets with Jim Chalmers, Richard Marles, Anthony Albanese even before his trip to the G20. Do the ministers in the Labor government listen to what he has to say on China?
Well, I think everybody's very respectful of Paul Keating, but the strategic situation has changed a lot since the 1990s. We are moving from a unipolar world into a multipolar world. And in that multipolar world, we have to think differently about the way that we think about Australia's security, the way that we think about our defence posture, and the way we think about building relationships. And that's why the Foreign Minister has sought to build relationships broadly, and the government is making a big investment in our security.
So he's got outdated views on this issue?
I think his views are different to the government's, and the government's view is that in a multipolar world, we need to be building relationships and we need to be investing in our security.
Just on the New South Wales state election, Chris Minns, Dominic Perrottet, we've got just over a week to go until the polls. Your electorate of Parramatta, or your area of Parramatta, came up in the debate that was held today because issue of infrastructure. How do you think it's going? Are you expecting a Labor win?
Look, I think it's going to be close. I think it'll be a real nail-biter next week. But I think Parramatta is a good example of where the electorate is really falling in between the choice between Minns and Perrottet, which is quite a clear choice.
And which way is it falling?
I think they're seeing that this government really just has one trick, and that trick is privatisation. But ultimately, when you see the new infrastructure, when you see the new services, people in Parramatta are paying for that in their tolls. They're paying for that in higher charges. And so I think they think that that trick has done, and they're looking for a fresh approach.